welcome back once again to the Cocktail Kitchen.
Welcome.
We have with us a wonderful bourbon and rye here, two of the whiskeys that we talked about today. We're making a Manhattan, and you will see we have a wonderful bottle of sweet vermouth, meaning that we are going to be making a traditional sweet Manhattan. The bourbon we will put aside, and instead measure out the Bullet Rye. Bullet Rye is a rye that I definitely enjoy in this drink. I think that the Manhattan, more than any other drink, depends on an appropriate complementary spirit. Have you ever had rye, Kevin?
I believe so, since I've had Manhattans with you before.
Well, then I must be doing my job right. Yeah. So, we have there 2 ounces of rye and 3/4 ounces of sweet vermouth. 3/4 ounces is a size that can be very inconvenient to measure if you don't have a jigger that measures it exactly. I like to use measuring spoons for a lot of measurements, but there is no 3/4 ounce measuring spoon, so you'd have to use a tablespoon and a half tablespoon, and that's just too much work for me. So I finally caved, bought the 3/4 ounce jigger. The other side is 1 1/4 ounces, and I've never encountered a recipe for any cocktail that calls for 1 1/4 ounces of anything. But again, we have 3/4 ounces of sweet vermouth. Today's a special day. We are going to be using bitters for the first time on the show.
Ooh.
We are at the end of our bottle of Angostura bitters, so while I might some days say use 2 dashes, today I'm only going to use 1 because as the bottle gets to the end, the dashes get bigger. Has something to do with gravity? I don't know, I'm not a physicist. 1 dash. So Kevin.
Yes.
How are we going to be preparing this cocktail?
Well, I believe we are going to be putting ice into the Boston shaker.
That's right.
And shaking it.
Are we going to be shaking it?
No, we're going to be stirring it with the stirrer.
Aha, that's... my ice appears to be freezing to the bottom of this bowl. This happens a lot when...
You leave the bowl out beforehand and then put it in the freezer.
It's an interesting quality that a lot of freezers have when they have a sort of auto-defrost going on. But don't worry, we are just fine in that department. That's a wonderful amount of ice. Ice is going to melt as you stir, but you don't want your ice to melt too much beforehand. This was ice that we had out before that was starting to melt a little bit, so we put it in the freezer quickly to make sure that we didn't get any excessive dilution. That is the reason that it froze over again, which means that our cocktail is going to be nice and slightly diluted, but not too dilute. We're going to strain this out, and that brings us to the question of garnishes. What kind of garnish do you think we should use, Kevin?
I believe we are going to use an orange peel this time.
Interesting. There are 2 garnishes that you could use with Manhattan. You could use an orange peel or a cherry. Personally, I normally prefer to use the cherry for a rye Manhattan with sweet vermouth and an orange peel for a bourbon Manhattan made with dry vermouth, just because the orange and bourbon tend to complement one another. But at the same time, rye and orange also complement one another, and cherries can be kind of inconvenient to buy an entire jar of if you're just making one cocktail. Kevin is going to zoom in on this lovely cocktail as I get that orange.
Ooh. There you have it.
On the subject of cherries, some people like to use the more neon maraschino cherries of the sort that you put in ice cream sundaes. Some folks say that you should instead use a more gourmet brandied or maraschino cherry. Whatever sort of gourmet cherries you can find. I actually, if I'm going to use a cherry, prefer the neon red ones, because when you drop that in a brown drink, you can actually see it. Drop a brown cherry in a brown drink, and it disappears. What's the point? So we have 2 lovely little swaths of orange that we've cut off. You could twist it, you could in the style of a twist, as we showed in the previous episode. What I prefer with a Manhattan, because I don't like to drop the entire peel in the drink because the pith is a little bit bitter, I like to just squeeze it over the top. And we have a wonderful little spritz. And that is a traditional Manhattan with a wonderful orangey, oily aroma. Kevin, give that a smell.
That's nice.
Awesome. And because Kevin, I believe, tasted 2 of our previous cocktails, I will taste this one. And you have a wonderful complement. The spice of the rye and the sweetness of the vermouth definitely blend together very effectively. I couldn't picture this working with a bourbon, because that would just be too sweet. But a nice balance of dry and sweet really makes for a pleasant drink that stays pleasant as you drink it. So thank you, and let's return to the studio once again.